Hi guys, how you all doing?
Hey.
Yeah. How's PAX treating you? Pretty well? Great, great.
It's too early.
It's too early. It is very early. Appreciate you guys all waking up and coming out here. It means a lot to us. So I guess raise your hands if you hate Teemo in our game. Anyone? Ooh, okay, good number. So this presentation is kind of to show like a light other side of that. All of our players hate certain champions, but the designers think some of them are a pain in the ass to work on too. So that's what this will be. It'll be a short presentation, and then we'll take a lot of questions from you guys. So without further ado, top 5 pain in the ass champions to balance. And who are we? I'm John Frank, also go by Riot Soter. A designer on the live gameplay teams.
I did not make this presentation. I'm not endorsing this Teemo lover bullet point.
Yeah. Do you want to say a few things about yourself?
Yeah.
And,
Hey, I'm
like,
Mark.
which champions you hate?
Sure. Yeah. I'm Scruffy. I'm the lead champion designer. So I've worked on a kind of like indirectly, the last many or so new champions and champion updates for a couple years.
Great. All right. I'm going to talk a little bit more about myself because I'm allowed to, and I get to control the slides. It's great. So before working at Riot, I was an attorney. And then about 3.5 years ago, same time as Mark, I was like, man, it would be really great to work at Riot. But I didn't just jump into it. At first, I was like, oh, there's so many things I can do. Of course, I wanted to be a pro player. I'm really bad, so that didn't work. I tried to be a coach, and that went even worse, if possible. Then I did shoutcasting, writing. I did about 50 episodes of like podcasts. And then I tried to be a team owner. Like back in the day, we didn't have LCS yet, so I was like, oh man, I'm going to put together like a team, make a team house, and really try to get together like 5 young gentlemen and put together a great team in NA. And at the time, it was like Team Legion, who was like about 3rd, 4th place. But no one really understood that there was going to be like a profession in professional gaming at that time. So trying to convince people to like leave their families and leave their girlfriends to move into a house together just didn't work out at all.
I didn't know this about you, actually.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
You're learning something too. Great.
I know. I should be, yeah.
Yeah. So that's my non-traditional way of getting into game development. Mark is more of an industry veteran here. So I came in 3 years ago as QA, and first thing I got to work on was helping balance Braum, which was great. It was an awesome project as QA. And it's notable because to this day, internally, we have what we call Braum balancing, which essentially means releasing a champion way, way overpowered. And I loved it, and I always suggest we do that for every champion, and then I get in trouble from people like Mark who are like, let's be a little bit reasonable. So more recently, worked on other projects. I moved to design, moved to the live gameplay team, worked on item efficiency, some of the mage updates, Xerath and Ziggs, and most recently Kled, and then First Blood Tower Gold. But enough about me. The fun thing is the pain in the ass champions. Just gonna move on to them. Number 1 on our list, and these are in no particular order, but she is certainly high on my personal list, is Callista. So for each of these champions, I'm going to talk about what makes them great first, because they're all great and fun champions. There was a suggestion that we actually title this like the top 5 champions that Riot really doesn't want you to play. But that's not true, because we love a lot of these champions. We play a lot of these champions. And Callista in particular, like she bonds with her support. I was sold on this idea like late one night, certainly to you, the designer of it came up to me. He's like, okay, we're making a marksman. I really want like to get that feeling of like loyalty with your partner there. We're going to have some sort of like romantic tragedy backstory. And he told me, okay, you're going to get to bind with one person. Like if you're around them, you're going to be better. They're going to be stronger, and you're going to get to save them. I was like, oh man, this is a marksman I want to play. I'm a support main, so it kind of appealed to me in that fashion. And that was like the genesis. That was like the one main thing that she was going to do. Since then, like she's kind of changed her persona, and like people know her for other things. In particular, like she has infinite stacking damage, and that's just an amazing thing. Like if you hit someone for long enough, those Ren stacks are going to build up, and you get to one-shot them. And the other thing, which she's very notable for, and probably causes the most amount of frustration, is that she's like kiting goddess. Like if you are a subset of melee champions, you are never going to catch up to her, and that causes a lot of problems in our games, and like transitions into, why is she a pain in the ass?
The kiting. That's the what were we thinking element in my mind.
Yeah, it was like the second half of production where we're like, okay, we know what she's going to do. What else can she do that's going to be really interesting for a marksman? Because like they tend to just be like, oh, I want to right-click a guy and just stand there. So her jumping along and like kind of orb walking on her own mechanic was the next interesting thing she did. But, as I mentioned, pain in the ass because she invalidates a huge part of our roster. I used to play a lot of Udyr. Once Callista was in the game, I was like, oh, I don't really want to play that champion anymore. I would never catch her, right? And then eventually she would whittle me down. She got to build lifesteal. It was a terribly frightening thing. But the main thing that causes us a little consternation when trying to balance her is her mechanical complexity. And this can be wonderful, but it also has its drawbacks. Everyone wants to master a champion. Everyone wants to put 100 games into it and be like, I'm legitimately the best Callista in the world. However, when we go back to balance it, how do we balance for the Callista in professional play versus the Callista in bronze? And that really creates a huge gap and really throws a wrench in our plans. And that's kind of why she sometimes gets a little bit more neglected. But I did mention we're gonna throw some buffs her way. You hear that?
Yeah, we're working on it. I mean, we might need to change a few things to make sure that it's sustainable in the long run, but the goal is to probably raise the skill floor a bit so that she becomes a little bit more accessible without really touching the high end. Funny anecdote about her kiting patterns. So the designer that was working on her at the time, early on in Callista's development, was saying, oh, I'm going to do this whole thing where she dashes, and the point was it's going to teach you, it's going to teach players how to attack move, how to attack and then move as a carry. It's like, oh, it's going to be great. It's going to be this entry-level thing. You're going to learn how to play AD carry. And it ends up being the hardest AD carry by far, by a mile. So didn't exactly work out as planned.
Yeah, there's other vestiges of that in her kit as well. Her auto attacks can be dodged if you duck into a brush, which is great. That's a great mechanic. People should learn to go into the brush. And playing against her, that's something that people very rarely use. And because she throws out so many attacks, it's not actually a feasible strategy. All right, so the next champion, I'm gonna pause a little bit.
Any guesses?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you a couple hints, and then we can shout out some guesses. Okay, I like that. I like that.
All right, jumping right to it.
All right, you guys might have a little bit better luck if I give you a hint. So he is probably the champion most likely to make your opponents cry.
Oh,
all right, I heard it up there. So it is Rengar. He's also #1 on my list. Mark, actually, I think you like him, so.
Yeah, he's not on my top 5 personally. I kind of like the knife cat.
So it is Rengar. Why is he a beast? He is very high risk, high reward. You get to trade yourself for the AD carry. I guess my analogy in chess would be oh, if Rengar is the knight, he gets to go after the queen, and most of the time just gets to wipe him off the battlefield, and that's awesome, right? He also has a great skill fantasy. He has a lot of optimization around his ferocity, and he's a stealth murderer. We show that in our videos. He's really epic. If you want to kill one person, that is your goal in the game, or your goal could be making people cry, then he's really the guy for you. But why is he a pain in the ass? And I think my big thing is just innately his main pattern is get on top of a person and kill them as fast as humanly possible. The end result of that is if you're successful, if you're a champion in League of Legends and you can actually sometimes complete your pattern, is the opposition has no chance for response. They have no agency. This little GIF, I apologize for the quality, is I think it's Liquid Inori running through an entire team. It's in solo queue, but it is an entire team of professionals, and he just jumps on double lift and kills them. And they were sitting on a pink ward. They had all their skills prepped. You see that Thresh throw out.
He just freaks out. The Thresh freaks out into this place because the Rengar is so ridiculous.
He's so fast that there's actually not a good time to respond, I don't think. So yes, that is why he tops my list. And of course, the stealth murderer, which is part of what makes him awesome, is part of what gives you such a low response time to him.
So the interesting thing about Rengar's sort of type of problem, this is a mechanic. Rengar is a balanceable champion. We can literally tune it so that he wins and loses roughly 50% of the time. But when your sort of core mechanics or your core goal of delete someone with no response is sort of so frustrating to play against, it's not a matter of can we make it work, it's do we want this to exist, right? To sort of create a hypothetical, we could make a champion that moves super slowly, right? Has no dashes, moves 1/2 the speed of a normal champion. They just lumber around, and if they ever get close to you, boom, you're just dead instantly. We could balance that character. That character could exist, could be fair in our competitive game, could be, and they probably have to play with tactics around hiding in brushes and stuff. But that's not probably not a very fun experience to play against. Wait, did I just create Garen in this example?
You did. He's in every brush.
But regardless of if that is Garen or not, it's balanceable, but it's not going to be fun for anyone to play against, and it's not creating an engaging, game experience. And so, like, that's the root of these type of problems.
Mm-hmm. And Rengar is one of our champions on this list that kind of has a happy ending or a hopeful ending, in the sense that he has changes coming up in 622, which is like should be a couple days from now. I think it's next Tuesday,
away.
Wednesday. The kind of trailer is up on Reddit or whatever news source you want to go to. So you should check it out. Like, mainly we have given you more time to respond to him, is the hope, and also given him kind of like a pattern where he can actually get out, he can escape on occasion, which is kind of what he needs. If we're expecting him to still go in and assassinate, he has to have some sort of fallback and reasonable chance for success.
Rengar broke the PowerPoint.
It's Rengar. It's always bugs.
The bugs. That's good.
I'm like trying to think of the next champion, but I can't. I need all these instructions.
Well, people can guess it for us.
Yeah. Any guesses before I hop to it?
I heard some good answers and
Yeah.
some correct answers.
Yeah, there's some correct ones. I actually just can't remember which one's next, so we're gonna have to go
Let's
see
find
it
out.
together. Yeah.
Here we
no,
go.
It's Italy. I didn't hear anyone say this. So as I went around the office and I kind of pitched these ideas, I was like, talking to other designers, who do you have like the least amount of fun working on, or who has the biggest issues historically? I got a lot of different answers, and of course it's different if we talk about now versus if we talk about a couple years ago. And for a lot of these slides, I try to look at both. So in this case, we have Nidalee, old Nidalee in particular, who is a super sustainy laner. She just healed herself up and continuously auto-attacked you until you were forced to leave the lane. And then she transitioned into the stereotypical siege champ, maybe the best artillery champ we have in our game at the time.
Yeah, busted. It was not good.
Yeah, it was not good, but it's like, what is an artillery champion? It's this Nidalee. The problem with it was she was artillery, but she also escaped incredibly well. She also helped her team siege in terms of giving them an attack speed bonus. She healed up any any counters to her, any attempts to actually poke her back just got healed away because she had a lot of AP and a great ratio on that heal. And so at the end of the day, we're like, this isn't really a balanceable kit because there's no significant weaknesses. Her end game is sitting outside of a turret and poking you, and all of your chances or all of your attempts to respond are just going to fail just by nature of her kit. She had all of the advantages in her own hand.
So we like to categorize our champions. There's 130 champions in the game, but we like to categorize them into buckets of kind of rough classes. And there's a class that we call internally artillery mages. And old Nidalee was one of these, so is someone like Ziggs or Xerath. These are very long-range characters that have a sort of very unique power in sieging and poking. They have the most long-range spells. They have pretty low cooldowns, and they're just going to try and whittle you down. But the key weakness that makes this class of character or champion, work and not just be uncounterable is that when you catch them, they're supposed to die. They're squishy, and they're kind of immobile, and they have to play this keep-away game so that they can keep poking you. And Nidalee, with cap form, with pouncing, and all of the heals that she had, just totally broke down the rule set of what she was supposed to do, what she was supposed to be good at, because she was definitely good at it, and what she was supposed to be bad at, which she was not bad at.
Not bad at all. Nope. And that brought us to kind of giving her a fairly large style rework in which she turned into an assassin and actually changed her from a laning champion into a jungling champion. And I love talking about her because many opinions about her are kind of skewed, hate getting chased down by her, but actually jungling as her is a lot of fun. There's so many optimizations you get to make. You get to press so many buttons because half your abilities don't cost mana, so there's no downside to it. In fact, you should be pressing all those buttons. And she ends up being a pretty unique high-risk assassin, very reliant on actually landing the spear. There's ways to get away from her. There's ways to interrupt her jump. There's certainly some element of counterplay there. But the issue that we've seen, in addition to her ability to clear the jungle way too fast, is that she had a lot of hidden mechanics on her kit. I think some of the best examples of this is when she pounced, she had an auto attack reset. When she swapped forms, she had an auto attack reset. And these are great mechanics that actually made her feel really clean to play. Like, you would swap forms, you'd be like, oh, great, I'm auto-attacking again. That feels like it should feel. In reality, she was still on her cooldown from her previous auto-attack. And the issue we ran into her here is, like, at low elo, she won, like, 42% of her games. And then at high elo, she would win, like, 55% of her games. And we're like, why is this? And that was because when a newer player took her into the jungle, they didn't even know what they were doing wrong. You can't, like, see the auto-attack resets. And in addition, like, her kind of, like, bushwhack pattern was very hard to optimize and very hard to learn. So the end result was, oh, with all these mechanics on our kit, we couldn't really balance across elos, which is one of our goals. Like, we have kind of like a mainstay, which is about platinum, 1800 MMR, which is like where we hone in on to get balance. But we wanted them to be in a reasonable place, like in professional play, all the way down to, below 1200 MMR, right? So that is Nidalee in a nutshell. Do you have anything?
I mean, I didn't know about half of these mechanics on there, and I'm the lead champion designer at Riot Games. And so, like, and what seems like it was a good lesson in, like, what originally was there for, like, smoothness of the play experience. Whenever you take an action, the next action that you're expecting, which is like my auto attack swing, is happening, and it all feels great. But what it leads to is, if you're a pro-level player, there's actually a lot of optimizations there that you have to do now to access the full power of the champion.
Yep.
And so it's often not worth, when we are now in the future designing things to sort of like make a champion feel good, we also have to watch out for, are these also creating hidden optimizations that make the character nearly impossible to balance, or make the character trash for a player that's not in Master or Challenger?
Yeah, and we do come to a case where it's like, oh, we can balance this champion, but we have to do it in kind of an unfortunate manner by, like, removing some of these hidden mechanics. And that feels really bad to the players who've kind of mastered her and put, like, all those hours in, because they're like, oh, I know all of these tricks, and now they're gone. And we get a lot of, like, responses like, oh, now it doesn't feel as clean. It feels a little clunky, which is a really unfortunate word. But that is, like, certainly something that we faced when we took away some of these mechanics from Nidalee. All right, so some people mentioned Azir earlier on. You're right, absolutely.
That one's a gimme.
Yeah, it is a gimme. No one was like, oh, why is Azir on your list? Certainly not. So we'll start. What makes him spectacular? I think, like, the Shurima Shuffle, or the Azir Sec, or there's probably like 100 other names for it, is one of the, like, highlight moments of our game. You can displace the entire enemy team. It is amazing, right?
This GIF is mesmerizing.
Yes. This GIF, to explain, it's a NALCS game. It's Team Liquid's Phoenix 1v4ing people. And 1v4ing in professional games doesn't happen generally, but the other fun tidbit about this is, like, he's hiding under a turret that only Azir could make. He, like, made his own turret here. In fact, he never even hits Aframu, who's the bard at the bottom of the screen. Like, he doesn't touch him with his champion at all. It is just a factor of, like, the bard went in to tank the turret, and it happened to be Azir's turret, so he got credit for all 4 of those kills. And CLG was, like, absolutely certain, like, we have this guy pinned down. He's, like, a ranged mage. Like, we have him cornered. He should be, like, out of luck entirely. But of course he wasn't. And yeah, I guess I can't even say anything more about that. It's just flabbergasted me and kind of makes me upset when I see it. Other great things about him is he feels like he controls the battlefield. He gets, as I mentioned, to raise his own turrets and have his own soldiers, and then put another, like, 5 soldiers out in the world, and they get to stand there as a wall. It's great. And he's incredibly self-reliant. So if you wanted someone that you could master, and, like, you'd be like, oh, I have no weaknesses. I get to hit them from range. If they jump on me, I get to dash away. If they jump on me again, I get to knock them away. He was kind of the staple champion on our roster for that. Unfortunately, that's also what made him a huge pain in the ass to balance, because he was so incredibly self-reliant. He really didn't have any weaknesses. And this wasn't true, like, across all elos. Like, certainly in some elos, it was like, oh, his laning phase was rough. If you got put against a Fizz, you would just die over and over again. Farming on him could be kind of difficult. Like, you could get ganked because you wouldn't have a soldier ready to, like, dash away to. But as you got higher in elo and as you got put more games into him, we saw, like, there was no reason not to pick him in competitive play. And when that's the case, and we want a little bit of diversity in that competitive play, we have to take some drastic measures with him.
I mean, there's an interesting sort of psychological element here, too, and when you have too much stuff, right? Azir just kind of has too much stuff. He's got really good sustained DPS. He's got pretty good range poke. He's got good CC and sort of zone control with his wall and with the actual just zones that his soldiers create on the battlefield. He's got good self-defenses with a shield and a dash. I mean, I could go on, right? And the issue is when we're trying to balance this character and we know that we need to sort of tune up and down certain elements or even just cut something altogether, there's the Azir player that really loves his damage output. There's the Azir player that really loves his mobility, and the Azir player that really loves his crowd control and zone control. And so the negative impact of us having to sort of remove one of those things is going to be really severe. And so it's not a great situation to be in. And this is like the sort of thankless job of like the balancing side of these things, because you're going to have to kill sort of someone's precious thing that they love about a champion, and that's not a good situation to be in.
Yeah, we get a lot of player pain from that, but like even as developers, like if I was to go back and do this, I'd be like, oh man, what is the linchpin? What is the biggest problem on his kit? I'd be like, man, you can't give this control mage like that ultimate and not expect him to go crazy in competitive games. Like displacing potentially all 5 enemy champions is ridiculous, but we've seen it in the live environment for so long, and it is so cool to see that like I would not want to take it away anymore. It's just like a staple of his champion. All right, I think we're moving on to the final one. Oh, okay. He's an oldie but a goodie. I think we've changed him in about 50 separate patches. I just went through and was like, oh, where do we have a line in this patch note? So many patches. But he is like our stereotypical like combo caster. He's a rapid fire guy, and we've kind of put him in all of our cinematics and whatnot. On the left-hand side here, I have like old icons and new icons, just because I always like looking at those and being like, oh, artists have like really stepped up their game since the start. So that's like Rune Prison, old versus new, Overload, old versus new. I think Desperate Power, perhaps, old versus new. And not only do we as Riot be like, man, this is one of our staple guys of the game. He's cool, figurehead, but we also have the like fortunate circumstance of like Faker loves him too, and Faker's obviously like the best player in our game. So in our like most recent cinematic, or rather music video, which was Zed's Ignite, we have like Ryze entering the scene, and then it cuts back to Faker, and then he's sitting up on a throne, he jumps down, he turns back into Ryze, and they do like a little clip of the last World Finals where he just blows up the entire enemy team. It's a very accurate depiction of what he did in that tournament. And then we fast forward to this year, and really we saw the same thing again. It was like, you cannot give Faker a Ryze. Even though he's like entirely different, like, I wouldn't say entirely different, but like the way he wins is quite different. We still see Faker being a master of it, and most teams just banning him away because they didn't want to see that or try to play against it. So instead of like the standard, like, oh, what makes him a pain in the ass, I have what makes him a pain in the ass at every step of the way, because we've had like...
And then we're going to announce the next year's Ryze rework.
Yep. Rework number 5 or 6. Yeah, I counted like 5 reworks. It kind of depends, or updates. It kind of depends on like what you include in that terminology. But these were like the major shifts. And I wasn't even playing for the first one. I just like remember hearing stories about it. So the first one I called like the Spell Fluxer. As I recall, the pattern was you would try to like flash onto someone, rune prison them, and just bounce your spell flux back between you and them, and generally they would die. It would be like one of you would die, but it was normally them. And apparently back then, like Rune Prison lasted 3 seconds. So we tend not to have that like length of CC in our game anymore. But yeah. But that was like moderate and okay for his pattern. Fast forward a couple months, and we have like the starting creations of like a rapid fire mage, where his like success case was getting off a ton of spells in a row and actually like weaving his spells in a combo pattern. And like we still see that today. It's great. Then it was like a couple years before we really like again tied him to mana. And we thought this was pretty clever, and it turned out pretty well. It's like makes him feel unique. He's like the mana mage. Some of the drawbacks, though, were like, oh, where do you get like your most amount of mana in this game? Well, we have Archangel Staff, but that then turns into a shield, so it's kind of defensive at the end of the game. And we also have Frozen Heart, which would allow him to stack like tons of CDR and also just outstat everyone. So this was kind of the creation of Stat Check Ryze, where he clicked on you, and then you died or he died, but he had like 500 armor, so generally you died, especially if you were like a mid-range AD carry. And there wasn't much playing around him except like stay a decent distance away from him. So coming up to 5.8, we solved some of those problems. Q was no longer like, oh, I just point and click on you, I win every time. Like, you actually had a skill shot, you had to aim it. Your pattern was like significantly more complex. You had to rotate through those abilities in a pretty defined manner. For the past couple of reworks, I can't play Rise. Like, he is way too hard for me. It's unfortunate, and one of these days, I keep on telling the designer on it, I'm like, I'll learn it. Trust me, I will learn it, but it is going to be a tough, tough task. As a side result of like these rather tricky combinations, he ended up getting his pattern where he could almost perma-root people if you did it near perfectly and at low ping. And so we didn't see this coming. I don't believe we saw this coming.
It was a surprise. Yeah, definitely a surprise.
It was a surprise, and then we saw like in pro play, I think it was Huni who like rooted a Maokai 4 times over the course of a top lane fight, and we're like, this is probably not okay. This is probably not okay. And so finally, like relatively recently, patch 6.14.
I like how you had to take a drink just to finish the rest of the story. It's like so long.
Well, it's a number of years. We're going back to 2009 here. But more recently, we had our final, like, well, not our final, our next.
Yeah, you can never say that. Never say that.
Final is way too optimistic. We had our next Rise update where we like gave him the ability to Realm Warp, and this allowed us to kind of take off his like steroid on his R, which gives us quite a bit of room in like toning down that pattern. And we also made the like perma-root capabilities just impossible. Like, you're no longer getting a lot of cooldown back on your W such that you can, you know, rotate them together. So we made some like really big gains there, but we're stuck with the problem of, man, we're giving you a team mobility tool that is likely going to be like a lot more effective in professional play than in the hands of like your average person who's not communicating over voice chat and what have you.
Right. It's interesting too, because each sort of step on it, there were problems that we identified. We tried to fix them, and often we did successfully. But then it's like, what's the next tier problem, or what's a sort of tangential problem that we might have introduced? And so like at the mana mage tier and before, it's like there was like when John's saying stat check, it's like there's low outplay potential for Rise or his opponent. There's just no way for either of them to display who is the more skilled player. They just end up, you know, mashing their skills into each other, and who had the higher stats wins. And so then in the 5.8 version, that's mostly fixed, and then suddenly this sort of perma-root exploit sneaks in, and the sort of difficulty curve blows out, and it's like, wow, this has become way too hard for an average player. And so that creates another balancing problem.
Yep.
Then with the 6.14 version, it's like, great, we fixed the perma-root stuff, we fixed a lot of the agency problems, the outplay potential, and we've actually added unique utility to the character so that he's not just like a damage ball. But then it's like the new issue, which is something that I think is debatable whether or not this is a problem or just something we have to deal with, which is this is a kit that's much, much more powerful in coordinated team play than in sort of a solo queue environment.
Right. And the other thing that makes him so much better in the hands of a pro player and on a like tournament realm is that, especially in his previous iterations, not quite so much in the newest one, but still there's remnants of it, is that you actually need like really low levels of ping to get the most you can out of the character. So when we're playing it generally like on 60 ping back home, like, oh, this combo is like isn't even like possible. And then we put in the hands of Faker and someone in Korea or just on a pro stage, and certain patterns become like a lot more feasible and possible, and we witness them and get very, very sad about it. So I'm going to do like a TLDR of the painful issues that we run into, because otherwise my job would be great. I would just be like, oh, we're just going to tune that number down and that number up. It's great. Everyone's really happy. I will say that like our players are very receptive to the idea of like just like minor number tuning. Everyone's like, even if it's their main, they're like, oh, this is great. He's not going to be banned anymore. I'm going to get to pick him more. So I love that end of it, where in general the player base is like, all right, I see what you're doing there. We're okay with that. Where it goes wrong is when we have to touch one of these things, and we're like, oh, we have to remove a hidden mechanic, and players are like, oh, no, don't touch that. That is the thing that I specifically learned. And I sympathize with them. But going down the list, we have high mechanical complexity. This is like the Callista level, where you might end up in the game like with a wrist that doesn't work anymore. But our main issue there is, of course, like the difference between professional and normal play. Defining moment is kind of inherently frustrating. This is a Rengar case, and then like also the stories that Mark created that kind of just explain Garen, where you have no agency to respond to them. Lack of weaknesses, which would be like kind of old Nidalee, and also the Azir case, where you do something incredibly well, but you don't have the weaknesses that are intended to be associated with your class or role. Strict reliance on low ping, which is kind of the Rise case, where it's like, oh, we don't even see these patterns manifest until they get on tournament realm or like a very low ping realm. And then hidden complexity, which is kind of like the new Nidalee case, and has been the case in a lot of other champions, where there are like mechanics that are intended, of course, but like very hard to learn. And then at the end of the day, we decide, oh, this isn't actually the skill test we like are expecting from these players. So I have an honorable mention section, but following this, we're going to have a Q&A. So start thinking about those, and we'll have people line up here. We also call this the bench. Relay just called it that, so I could put Tom Kench on here. I don't know if he's that big of an issue.
He had his moment, but he's not like some of these others, though.
Yeah. Yeah, some of these others have like long histories of being problematic. First, we have like what I've dubbed the globalites. I actually kind of made a mistake here. I left off Twisted Fate just because like, he's been okay as of late. But for these other guys, it's like, oh, these are true globals that massively affect other sides of the map. But we also have to give them some sort of laning presence. And how much laning presence can we give them if they're like really contributing all the way on the other side and really winning other lanes for them? And that's kind of where we get caught up there with Soraka, Gangplank, and Shen. And it tends to be like, again, they show up a lot in competitive play. Our next section, I think I heard a bunch of people like shout out Jax in particular as one of the problem children that we might be running into. And he just barely didn't make the list. Because we see these guys, like, up until a certain MMR or ELO, they just run over games. Like, it doesn't seem like there's any response to them. They just take their time, they get 2 farmed, and then they get to 1v1 and 1v2 everyone. So it's a little ridiculous.
And it's like we joke in a playtest when someone's playing Master Yi, and we say, oh, are you playing a Diamond Yi, which is actually the bad one? This is when you're doing badly. Or are you playing Bronze Yi, which is when you're playing like a god and you're wrecking the entire game? Because that's, where Yi shines.
Yeah, the great thing about them is like the more selfish you are, the better you're going to do with them. And like as you start like being more like team oriented, like showing up for objectives or ganking, like all those things are very bad on these champions. Just keep on farming and then find people out solo. Pretty sure that's the way to success there. And then finally, we have the bench, mainly just to include Tom Kench in there. But these are also a number of people that would be like, oh, who are some of the most frustrating champions of the game? Zed would be a great issue where he is sitting, well below 50% win rate, like across most MMRs, but no one wants to play against him. His weaknesses aren't particularly apparent, and so he ends up having like a high ban rate on most servers. And then with Lucian and Alistar, historically, they've been a problem because they just showed up in competitive because they're kind of the generalists. They're just good at almost everything. Like you can't like point them out and be like, oh, this is what he's really weak at. In Alistar's case, it's like, great, he has initiation, he can be your soak tank, and he can also sustain you up in a lane. So yeah, that is kind of the problem with that last group there. It's like a little bit too good at everything, and the weaknesses that we say are there just don't like come to fruition in the normal course of a game.
Yep.
Right. All right. So that kind of leads us to the end of here. So we're going to start the Q&A. I think we're going to have some microphones down in front. Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so feel free to line up on, I guess this is the one mic we have, and maybe we have one on the other side too, okay. And we'll just throw any questions our way about champion balance, the game in general, where we're going, who our favorite or least favorite characters are. Yeah. Mine's not Teemo. Don't believe anything he says.
Don't believe his lies. Yeah, so let's actually play not a game. Let's have a little fun with it. So if you could introduce yourself, give me your name, and then tell me also your least favorite champion. Yeah. And if you don't have one, because like not all of you necessarily play League, just say Teemo. It'll make me happy. All right, let's start over here.
Hello.
Hello.
I've sort of lost my voice, so sorry if it's a bit hard.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, me too.
My name's Jeremy. My least favorite champion is Fizz, because I love Teemo.
Nice.
Oh, man.
My question is, how do you guys balance, particularly when you're doing reworks, but also a little bit balance, the power levels of champions within their combat ranges. A specific example would be Heimerdinger when he had his rework. Pre-rework, his grenade was significantly more powerful the closer to him that he would cast it, because it was almost an instant stun or blind. And post-rework, it has an arc, which is, I believe it's fixed. And so with the number of champions with dashes, he became significantly weaker at close range.
So to talk about this Heimerdinger case specifically, I think this was more of a mechanical question of how strong is Heimerdinger at certain ranges, and where is he intended to be strong? Heimerdinger, by his kit in general, is stronger typically closer ranges, because that's where he's got his turret set up. You're kind of coming into his death trap, right? Melee have a lot harder time against Heimerdinger than other range do. And so this was more of a, and the fact that the grenade was stronger at closer range, I think fed into that even more. And so we're like, well, he's already strong at close range. He's probably too strong at close range. Let's pare that down a little to give Melee playing against Heimerdinger a chance, like just a chance, right? They still don't have a great time. And then we can compensate him in other ways in terms of like setup time or poke or stuff like that, or flexibility. I think a part of the rework added a lot of choice to like how he wants to set up his, does he want to go with a super turret or a better stun or better poke or better, rockets.
Yeah.
Cool.
I would add a little bit onto that, where it's like, oh, is there supposed to be any sort of counterplay when you get into short range with this champion? And like we've seen this be the case with like Nami. It's like, oh, when you get onto her, should she have a free stun? And we're like, no, that shouldn't be the case. And more recently, Gragas, which is a little more contentious, but it's like, oh, should he always be able to combo his skills together like perfectly to get you in the exact place he wants? Like that is not intended to be his strength.
Sometimes, though, we allow it because for certain characters that are really, really in a bad situation, if they're in that range to begin with, we say, yeah, this is fine. This is where your sort of, oh shit button gets to work, without fail, and that's okay. Like examples there that I can think of, like Soraka's, healing Q. It's basically instant when you're in melee range, but if you're in melee range on Soraka, she's not having a good time anyways.
Yep.
Thank you. Great examples.
Thank you.
Hey, how you doing? My name is Elam, and as for least favorite champion to verse, I do hate versing a Federelia.
All right. Yeah.
But my question is, how often is it, and do you have any examples of times when you're balancing a champion and you've thought of a rework that you can do for them, have it be a specific mechanic, something changed, something added, and you thought this will work really great, this will fix the problems with the champion, but it actually doesn't fit thematically with the champion at all?
Yeah, I can take that one
Yeah.
to start off with. I would say, like, on the balance team, we get a lot of problem champions pop up, and when we're thinking about how to fix them, like, a lot of the first things that spring to mind are new mechanics. I wouldn't say that, like, most of the time it's thematics that kind of, like, steers us away, but it's more so that, like, we have 2 weeks, we want a solution that's going to work, so we'll, like, put in this new mechanic, we'll throw it into a test, we'll be like, all right, is this the mechanic that's going to, like, solve the problems? And just, like, 95% of the time, definitely not. And the other 5% of the time, we're like, this might be the trick. Like, this actually might be pointed in the right direction. And then we have to consider, oh, does it thematically fit with the champion? And then we have to go, like, the extra steps. Does it need, like, art support? Does it need sound support? And what have you. So yeah, TLDR is, like, try a lot of them. Most of them don't get through. I wouldn't say thematics is, like, often the main reason why they fail, though.
Yeah, I think that we have a pretty strong baseline filter as well around thematics. It's just, most of us, I think, in our own minds are probably already just culling that. I don't often hear, we're talking about Lucian in Season 3, and he's picked in every game, and someone's not like, John doesn't come up to my desk and be like, I got it. Lucian's going to fly into space, and he's going to rain candy down, and then he's going to turn into a whale, and then it's going to fix it. That just never happened. I would have been like, what? So I just don't, I think that situation just doesn't really come up that often because we're already saying, what is that? No, just put that back on the shelf. Go think of something else. Cool.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there, my name's Craig. My most hated champion is Echo.
Ooh.
Mainly Echo top lane, which I'm about to ask about.
Tank Echo.
Yeah. With Echo, he was originally designed as an assassin, but as we've seen from the pro leagues, he's best played as a top laner. And from what we've seen in patch notes, you guys keep trying to readjust him to make him back into that assassin. Mm-hmm. Do you guys feel like this is just going to be a constant thing with Echo, or is he eventually just going to get nerfed down to the point where he's not good at being a tank whatsoever?
I'm optimistic. I think we'll be able to get him back into that assassin role. When you look at the kit, just from the outset, though, you can see like the reasons why he would want to be played as a tank. It's like, oh, he has to sustain for X amount of seconds to get a lot of use out of his ultimate. He has to like plan ahead with his W, or he gets to like kind of cheat that if he can just like remain in battle in the same place and get like a massive CC output. And those are kind of like tank patterns inherently. But I do think we have some plans. Like,
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things about Echo that like also like make him want to be a tank, right? There's things, he gets a massive shield from his W, and this is a mechanic that, in comparison to Fizz, who gets an untargetability, a big shield scales with how tanky you are. If you have more mitigation or you have more just baseline tankiness, it's better. Fizz's, untargetable playful trickster doesn't scale at all. It's just you're always, for 2 seconds or something like inaccessible to the enemy, and so that's like Fizz's mechanics ended up shoehorning much better into an assassin kit where you can build glass cannon and expect to reliably be safe for that amount of time, whereas Echo's kind of said, well, you can get a little bit of defenses if you're an assassin, or you can get a lot of defenses if you're a tank, and that was something that kind of kept biting us. From early on, we were saying, okay, nerf the base shield, nerf the, and there's even other elements, like John said, that make it even harder because he's waiting to get that shield, and being tankier makes waiting less risky.
Just a little side bit on there is we often like are releasing these new champions, and in playtests, like everyone wants to have the most fun, and like the most fun way to play a lot of champions is just building like full damage. And when they come kind of to the processing point, like the end of the line in terms of the champion production standpoint, I'm like, what happens when we build them tank? And like that is always a step we have to go through, because at the end of the day, people are going to try to get like away with the tankiest build they possibly can while still having kill threat. And so we've seen that pop up with Fizz and Echo. But we are remaining optimistic. I think we have some
related
good
anecdote.
ideas.
Like one of the Echo is such a great lesson for us that we've really been focusing on it a lot. And when we were working on Kled, we worked together on this project actually, and we were like, man, Kled has 2 health bars. It's going to be so great. He's going to tank. Kled's going to be a thing. Everyone's going to, and so it led to a lot of very specific decisions, like Kled's health applies to the Skrull health bar, not to the Kled health bar. Because if you can become tanky when you're trying to remount, you would always take that path. That's the dominant strategy. That is making remounting 100% reliable. And so, there were a lot of, and he still builds sort of semi-bruisery, and that matches our expectations, but we worked very hard and tested a lot of really weird tank builds to make sure that, he kind of ended up building at least a good portion of his items as damage items.
Yep.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
G'day, I'm Dean. Just sort of most annoyed is Zed. I know he's on the bench list, and good reasons for that.
Honorable mention.
Yeah. Main is Anivia, and it's just sort of a bit specific there with the glass cannon sort of area. With the recent rework with making her ult start small and a lot bigger, that sort of caused her to get a lot closer to people and just sort of be very vulnerable. Is there sort of any area to maybe look back over her, or obviously in the higher end elo with people like Froggen, that kind of becomes hard with low and high elo?
I will say that she had a little bit of a showing at Worlds. She certainly has some picks and some presence in competitive play, and that's kind of our main goal in terms of diversity. If you can have a small presence, if there's a reason to pick you up, that makes us very happy. And there's a lot of reasons to pick her up. I don't know if she's actually being played for the right reasons, because she tends to be just this burst mage where we kind of envision her as more of a control mage. In terms of making her tanky, we don't have anything in line or planned. However, I've always been pushing maybe we can make that wall more useful. The thing is, it is already game changing if you use it right. I don't know how much I can say about this, but we do actually have some current work in progress on her for my team that I'm very excited about. But it doesn't necessarily address her tankiness or survivability.
Yeah, I think that those changes though as well are things that we try to make changes even if we don't get to the endpoint that we think is 100% perfect, that we would like to stick with. And so we're saying you see Anivia drop the ult like the edge, right? When it used to not grow,
Yeah.
you would edge someone with it and then immediately sort of like spike the damage on them
Yeah,
with
that's
like
exactly what we relied on.
yeah, exactly. And so that's something that the change specifically sort of removed because we're saying, well, Anivia is about zone control, committing to areas, controlling those areas, not like spiky burst damage on a target. But if with that change she just didn't have the tools she needs to be quite as viable as she was before, we can now add in additional strengths to her, like better defensive ability or better ability to do sustained damage, like repeatability of her stuns or her CCs or her slows. And so it's like in the end, she was here, we made the change, she's down a little bit, but now we make another change and she's back up over here, and we've shifted her in a direction that makes the character sort of slightly better.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Richard. I think my least favourite's probably Gragas, just because I get sick of seeing him. My question was, sometimes in patch notes, you see like a long description about how you came to a decision about a champion, and then the actual change will be like +5 health. And I guess I wonder, how did you work out that was the change, and does it really make that big a difference when it's like +5 health on a champion that's going to have about 2,000 plus health anyway? Like, how is those minor changes come about?
So it's normally like +5 health per level or something that ends up being bigger than it originally appears on paper. I think, is the meme 5 AD or 3 AD or it's something.
It's like 480.
Yeah, 480. I think it's got to be 3 or 5. Those are such better numbers. But like we found, this actually makes a huge difference on the kit because it is one number, but it's applying to multiple of their abilities and their auto attack. And I will say that, like, kind of our process is we identify a champion. We're like, this champion is a problem, is either too weak, too strong, or unhealthy in some fashion. We give it to a designer. We're like, okay, find a solution for this. And we tend to iterate like a number of times. But like our main goal is kind of like set pretty early on. We're like, this champion is like too tanky. And we might like go a number of ways about reducing their tankiness. And therefore we'll like build up this context and like what we're doing with them. And at the end of the day, we're like, well, we can get all of our gains in a very simple fashion by reducing their health by 5. And so that's why you see there's actually been a lot of thought put into a mere stat reduction. But yeah, there was a lot of, I guess, I'm going back to saying it again, it's just like the end result patch note isn't like really the sum of the work that was put in.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm Martin, and I hate investing Mordekaiser because I feel like his ulti punishes you for doing well, because you get stronger.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if you could give a bit of insight on how you balance champions around items, like in particular Stated Devourer and things like that, and how you come to do it in tandem.
I think in general we try not to be like consider champions like and items in the same like breath and be like, oh, we have to nerf this champion or buff this champion because they use this item in particular. We do see in certain cases, like Stated Devourer is a great one, and Kog'Maw is also a great example with Stated Devourer, where we're like, hey, this is a champion who's going to interact uniquely with the item system. We're going to pay this cost, because ideally our item system is kind of robust enough such that we can like put any sort of champion into it, and it's not going to break the system and force us to nerf one or the other, right? But that was like one of the like main issues with the new Kog'Maw update was like, oh, we see him in the jungle. We don't really want him there, but he's taking such great advantage of these on-hit builds that there's no reason for him not to go there. So in general, try to keep them separate and not entirely reliant on them, but we do kind of break that rule sometimes and often regret it.
Yeah, whenever we do like major item changes, like if we're going to make the Juggernaut items or the Marksman items or the Mage items or something like, we do a pretty big audit of who are all the possible characters that we expect to be affected by this, who are the people that we think we didn't really want to be affected by this, but might like sneak in and start using these. You know, this is like creating some sort of League of Cleavers situation, and oftentimes we don't act on that preemptively unless we know, oh, this is going to break this character, or this character is going to use this item to an extreme degree, and then we have this like, these are our most likely top 10 champions that are going to be, offenders once this item comes out, and we need to watch their balance, especially in the next patch, and we'll respond from there, because sometimes we predict, oh, Vi's going to go crazy when she gets Deadman Plate, and it's like, it didn't change that much, or something, or like Jax is going to go nuts once he gets, Sterix or something,
Yeah.
and
I think
sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't, so we sort of have to make our our predictions and wait and see.
Yeah, I think the big example of that is when we removed DFG, we were like, oh, there's a lot of champions that rely on this item a ton. We're going to have to give them like preemptive buffs. And I think like Vhagar, Ahri, Syndra might have been in that list. And we didn't decide to go through with buffs on all of them. And it was before I was on the team, so I'm kind of like just remembering and probably misremembering it. But as I recall, we like removed the item, and a lot of those champions, like without any sort of compensation, like actually their win rate went up. So it is very hard to like determine the relation between items and a champion, especially when it's not their core. Like we do have a long storied past of like Aurelia loves Triforce. If we nerf Triforce, she's going to be weaker, and vice versa.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good morning. My name's Matt. My least favorite champion to be Zed, but only because he attracts so many toxic players. My question is, how often do you encounter sort of yo-yo balancing with champions, where when you balance them, when you buff them, they go straight to the top, 100% pick win, and then you sort of change them a little bit, they go straight back down to like off the bench. Some of them even go off the bench and into the dustbin, like Urgot. Urgot's
Right.
been living in the dustbin since season 1.
Right. It's interesting. This is a really interesting question, and this actually, I think the answer has a lot more to do with the champion mechanics, like the actual champion kits, than the balance. When you have a champion that ping-pongs from must-pick ban to total garbage tier, right, that usually means that their mechanics are either overlapping too much with other champions, or they're just like overly generalized. When you have a champion that does very unique things and has a very clear space in the sort of like roster, they can survive a lot more like buffs and nerfs. Like we pretty heavily nerfed Ashe right before the World Championships, for example, and she went from being picked sort of priority like all the time to being picked some of the time. So not all the time and not none of the time, because Ashe does pretty different things, right? A team with an Ashe is weak to certain things, strong to other things, and she brings certain types of like global pick presence with her ult and permaslows and stuff, and these are things that other AD carries don't do. But when you're looking at like who's a great example of someone who does this in the bad way, who ping-pongs really well?
So I guess like someone I like regret doing it with recently was Talia before Worlds, and it was not so much an issue like that she doesn't do unique things, because she does do like great unique things with her wall. It was more of a case that we didn't really understand like how important her wave clear was to her like her competitive presence early on, and like how important it was to her overall power, because players had relied on it to kind of like subvert like a lot of the laning game, and they like created like little patterns where they'd go in and steal the enemy jungle and just completely changed how you would play if you had like reasonable amounts of wave clear, which I think she does now. So she was an example of someone who like kind of like yo-yoed back and forth, not because her mechanics were terrible, but because we like gave her an over-reliance on something that we deemed was unhealthy, which was like excessive wave clear.
Right, we thought it was a small nerf, ended up being a very large nerf, and so that creates a bit of a like ping-ponging scenario.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Hey guys, Rise, Cooper, Rise main, glorified Rise main. So evidently I hate playing against Syndra. One of the parts of my question again with Rise, it's actually going off what he just said then about the yo-yo. I feel like with the buff cycle with Rise, he's got a bit of a bell curve. There's been times where I've picked him up and it's just impossible to play with him because you've nerfed either his base damage or his ratios really, really bad. But one thing I feel that you've done great with the new rework with that whole realm warp, it takes away, like you said, the nuke ability. But with his new passive where it's the, it's basically the codependent ratio where AP scales off matter and vice versa, so you have a variety of builds. It's a it gives you, I guess, different variety to play with, and the question is, how does he keep getting such strange nerf cycles where he's got a small, maybe a month period where he's strong, then 3 or 4 months where he's completely useless?
Right. I think that I agree. I love that you noticed as well. Like one of the solutions that we ended up at when we were reworking his mechanics with the mana problem, where it's like, oh, he scales on mana, so you just build tank CDR mana items, but turning mana into a bit of a like death cap effect for his AP lets you mix and match mana items and AP items.
I don't build death cap on him anymore. There's no real need for it.
Right. Well, mana kind of acts as the death cap, which is great. The question about why is he sort of go through this very painful nerf cycle, I think that comes down to pretty much exactly what John said in the presentation, which is just that some of his mechanics are so dominant in coordinated team play, right? The difference between what a high-level team can do with some of the Rise abilities
I
and
know.
what a regular player can.
Like you said with the voice chat where they're team communication to use the ulti perfect, I just tell them let me execute minions with E so we can get some bonus damage on them.
Yeah.
Small stuff like that. It actually, you're right, he's more coordinated, but he still has that 1v1 nuke ability on an AD carry.
Right, right. I mean, and so like in the end, we would love nothing more than to just like buff Rise and let Rise be a reasonable character for most players like you or me. But his high level ability, he would be so dominant in high level play that we have to sort of balance that. And in some ways, we may need to make some additional small changes to make that less of a thing, so that Rise doesn't have to be must pick ban in pro and 44% win rate for a regular player.
He's got a weird thing where I found before this rework, a small tweak would cripple him, and a small buff would make him busted like Jax, like a pub stomper.
Right.
He has that real bad ability. Before I leave, one thing: make a Star Guardian no-god skin, please.
That's
We'll-
not the
we'll
first
pass
time
the
we've heard
word
that.
on.
That is
Yeah.
not the first time we've heard that. Thanks for your question.
Thanks, guys.
All right, so my most hated champion would have to be Tahm Kench because he creates an inherently frustrating situation where he just runs off with the AD carry. That being said, I'm your Rengar player, so I can't complain. Now, my question is regarding to the new Rengar rework coming up, and specifically to the Bone Tooth necklace change. Now, with his original rework that happened back season 4, I think it was, you made the decision to move his Bone Tooth necklace stacks away from being strict stat buffs in the form of attack damage and armor penetration into more just unique quality of life changes that sort of just accentuated his hunter playstyle. What prompted the decision to take it back to just raw stat increases with the new update?
Ooh, this is a good question. I mean, neither of us directly worked on the new one. I actually I worked on the
old version.
2014 one that you're referring to. I think part of what they were trying to do was simplify in some ways some of because of the utility nature of the old Bone Tooth bonuses, where it would be like, oh, my leap range is different, my speed and brush is different, my vision range is different, right? These are the types of bonuses you used to have. They were, I think in some ways, harder to balance and harder to understand because his pattern would change so dramatically. And some of the new gameplay, like the fact that he's camouflaged instead of pure stealth, and the fact that he is like sort of revealing himself and his ultimate to one target specifically, or he's like available to attack one target, not others, made things like changing his leap range kind of unmanageable. And so I think they first were like, well, these old bonuses are kind of going to be a problem, so let's try and find something in game design terms that we would say is sort of sexy to replace it. And, you know, aggressive damage stats are pretty sexy, right? That's what a Rengar player wants.
Of course. Plus, we get a free crit. We don't need the crit anymore, so the AD is
Right.
doubly effective.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your question. It looks like we're running out of time. This is probably our last question.
Thanks, guys.
And we will be hanging around probably out in the lobby after the panel, so people that didn't get a chance to ask questions on the mic, just hang around. We'll be around. Yep.
Hi, my name is Tristan. My least favorite champion is LeBlanc because you might as well be AFK and be helping the team. So honestly, the most important rework that could possibly come up is when is Graves going to get his cigar? And
I'm glad you left the most important question to last.
yes,
Yeah,
it is obviously
great,
the most
great use.
important question. Now, if Graves is not going to get his cigar, then you need to make a cigar skin. Now, he's going to be dressed up as a cigar. His shotgun is going to be a cigar. He's going to shoot cigars. His smoke screen is going to be basically a giant cigar like on the ground. And it's
Wait,
just
slow
going
down.
to-
I'm writing all this down.
He's drawing
yeah, exactly. Okay, so yeah, Cigar Graves, he has a giant cigar with just his face poking out. The shotgun is a cigar. So the animation at the top with his shotgun pellets, they are cigars as well.
Of course. They
And
kinda look
so
like cigars.
basically when you shoot them, they don't disappear. So when they're active, it's lighter up the top and there's smoke coming off. And then when they're off, they're like just a stump at the end. Yeah.
Does he actually have a cigar in his mouth as well?
Well, I
Or would that
think
be too
that
much?
he should, but
Okay.
if he can't, then I think the cigar skin will satisfy most
Right, he
people.
can't. Right, exactly. Ratings board, no cigar in the mouth, but he is literally a full body
just a
cigar,
Yes.
and he shoots a cigar.
Yes. And the smoke screen is a cigar coming out of the ground.
Oh yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
of course, of course.
I think this really fulfills some people's fantasy. Like, I've talked to a number of people who are just like, I want to be a cigar, right?
Yeah, exactly. You have some great friends then, you know.
Very healthy individuals.
Yeah. I
Okay,
know.
so not exactly a question, but extremely useful. We will definitely send you 5% of the sales of that skin.
Woohoo. I'm going to be rich.
Well, thanks everybody. We hope
Yep,
you
thank
enjoyed
you.
it. Hang around if you have additional questions, and enjoy the rest of your last day of PAX.
Thanks, guys.